All right, folks, I have Mark revved up and ready to go to talk about the hype, mystery, and reality of the far, far away government changes for the FAR. So, Mark, first off, let's just start. What does FAR stand for?
Federal Acquisition Regulation.
Okay,
And that tone is rather ominous, David.
That's right. I'm ready to get you fired up and ready to go. So let's set the stage. So,
all right,
for those who aren't deep in federal procurement, what's the FAR?
The FAR is, as mentioned, is the primary regulation that the federal government uses when it procures goods and services to include construction. It's been around since 1984. It came out the same year as CICA, the Competition and Contracting Act. Right. And for a little bit of context, it took about 10 years.
10 years.
To create the FAR before it actually hit the streets.
That's like dog years.
Yeah. So it took a long time because prior to the FAR, you had umpteen different regulations by umpteen different agencies floating around. Wow. So it was the federal government's efforts to consolidate, to have a uniform regulation to guide procurement officials in the process of spending taxpayer dollars.
So now what is this FRO thing that people are talking about that's going to replace the FAR? You did the math, Marty. It was done in 84. How long is that? You did the math.
It's over 4 decades.
46 years, I think you said. So yeah. What is this FRO thing that says it's going to replace something that's been around the federal government for 46 plus years?
Well, RFO is the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul.
Ooh, that's fancy terminology. Revolutionary.
Yeah. So if it's revolutionary, then, that adjective,
yes,
has certain meaning, and it implies something rather significant.
That's why it was ominous. Remember, ominous, significant, Okay.
And a significant change on how the way the government buys goods and services. So that's my understanding, having been to a lot of different conferences, that is, in a nutshell, the big change is going on with the change in the political administration that started on January 20th of this year.
So, and then in our conversations, you're an interesting character, bit of a cynic, cynicism, nice little sense of humor there too. So you pointed out something ironic, right? The same senior procurement officials who grew this FAR, who built this FAR out, are now cheering for downsizing, saying we need revolution, we need RFO.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, in my mind, there's a certain irony because keep in mind, in addition to the FAR, you have agency supplements, and those agency supplements are, as their name implies, a supplement to FAR. And when you look at FAR 1.304,
Dash 5874.
Well, I don't know about that part.
I'm teasing. Go back and get the number right so they're not dealing with my crap.
So it says, if you have an agency supplement, it's not supposed to contradict or run contrary to the FAR. And I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, you have, board and court opinions. You also have federal law, meaning statutes enacted by Congress. But my all-time favorite, having worked at different agencies over the years, is that agencies actually grew their own layer of administration and bureaucracy. And again, not to sound mean or ugly, but I would characterize these folks as the good idea fairies. They always had a good idea on how to do things, and when you pointed out,
what does a good idea fairy look like? Are they ethereal? Or they got wings?
No, they certainly come around and tell you, you shall do this or you shall not do that.
Are they like gadflies? You have to push them away. They drive you
I wish you could. And I'm pretty sure that, the folks who are listening and that are 1102s or in the 1100 career field had their fair share of good idea fairies.
Yep.
And I can tell you, when you tell the good idea fairy that, this idea is not a good idea, number two, it actually runs counter to the rules, they took umbrage with that. But yet, it was amazing how the good idea fairies at all these agencies grew this incredibly complex.
So they become gremlins then. Instead of fairies, they turn into gremlins. Okay.
They grew this incredibly complex layers of rules and regulations and policies Now, fast forward to 2026, you got some effort or force that says, oh, we're going to streamline things and get rid of all this extraneous stuff. We're just going to go back primarily to what Congress enacted. A lot of those same folks who created these endless layers of administration and bureaucracy, they're now cheering, oh, we're streamlining things. So I just find some irony in that.
So the sufficiency promise, the pitch for the RFO is efficiency and taxpayer savings. Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, pressure test this for me. If we have fewer regulations, does that actually mean fewer people are needed to administer them? Or does ambiguity actually create more work?
Well, I mean, in my mind, theoretically, if there's less rules and regulations you have to follow, then that means you should have the ability to master the few rules and regulations that remain.
Yep.
And if that's the case, then you have fewer people above you who review your work to say, hey, this passes muster and it doesn't. And you should have almost no one around who are the good idea fairies in the good old days.
Yeah, but you don't need them.
Because you don't need them because, hey, there's now an emphasis on we're just going to kind of keep it to the mandatory minimum.
So the FRO traps and kills the good idea fairies.
It should. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to spawn a new generation of good idea fairies that are much more clever in how they hide their good ideas.
devious.
So I would say, yeah, but then again, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity and chaos because I've spent years trying to memorize the rules, memorize the cases, think through how those rules play out, how they should play out. And now I'm told, hey, a lot of that stuff you've memorized, you now got to memorize a new set of rules.
Poof, gone.
So yeah, I think that's going to create some challenges.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what about the protest and dispute side? Do you see caseloads at GOA or ASBCA or CBCA going down? Or could less prescriptive rules actually generate more disputes?
Well, again, theoretically, in my mind, they should go down because there's a lot of rules and regulations and FAR clauses that were created through border court precedent. Now, if there's a new set of rules that says you don't have to follow all these different rules, same analysis. If there's less rules to follow, there should be less disputable issues because there's less rules to follow. And I believe there's also this notion that if you're a contracting officer, you're going to be given even more broad latitude and discretion. So as long as you have a reasonable basis to do something, then I don't believe, there's a good chance that boards and courts are not going to step in and say, hey, that CO abused his or her discretion, because they're simply going to turn around and say there was a reasonable basis for that CO to do or not do something.
It's interesting. So we'll see if that works out. That's an interesting what's going to happen. Now, the quality question. You said quality has always been an issue. You've always said this. You said it as a superior, a supervisor. You say it now in the other side of the street as an executive VP. Why would a new framework fix a problem that's fundamentally about people and execution?
Well, I mean, I spent many times, reviewing the work before I left my division or my branch, and there was lots of folks, not to sound mean or ugly, that have been involved in federal procurement for decades. But when you read their written work, you would have to come to the conclusion that they really had no earthly clue what they were doing. I mean, they weren't even in the right FAR part. And even after you try to have discussions with them, you realize they really didn't have a great grasp of things. So now, if you're changing the rules, which they probably never really had a good grasp, saying we're going to have a new set of rules, and all those rules that they didn't really have the best grasp on, those rules are out the window. And now you're telling them, well, it's basically in your best judgment on how to do certain things. I just see that as opening up Pandora's box.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? You have to be really, really good at something to operate inside of smaller rules and structure. And if the people aren't really, really good, then it's going to be chaos if there's not rules and structure.
And,
Good.
Just looking at the federal procurement workforce, a lot of folks retired recently.
Yep.
A lot of folks were told to leave. A lot of folks just decided they didn't want to stick around anymore. Now, who they hire, that may have a lot of influence going forward. And a lot of the folks who are sticking around, who did stay, because a lot of those, folks who decided to stay in the civil service, they're going to have to kind of forget certain things and adopt certain ways of looking at things. And I don't think that's going to be, that's not easy for anyone. It's not going to be easy for me because
No.
once the official decree comes down that says, this is now the new FAR, you shall follow this word and letter and spirit.
So has the dust settled? There is no new FAR.
I mean, no, not in the sense that what's really going on. I mean, when you go and you look on the internet, you'll see all sorts of deviations. You'll see agencies that stepped in and there's memorandums saying, hey, they're adopting this revolutionary FAR override. But I can tell you now, the solicitations I look at, they're still using the legacy system. They have not said, okay, I think I've seen one that said, pursuant to the revolutionary FAR overhaul, blah, blah, blah. But then when you read the remainder of the document, it looks identical to what I've seen for decades.
Can I go out there and actually read the RFO? Is there a document that's the revolutionary new FAR?
No, it's a bunch of deviations. I don't think there's like an official document that says this is the brand new FAR. I haven't seen it. Maybe it's out there and someone will send me an email saying, hey, Mark, you're dumb. Here it is right here. But no, I mean, some agencies have adopted it. Some haven't. Some adopted it in whole. Some have adopted it in
people just send you emails in general that say you're dumb? Well,
they send me other emails that say a lot worse things, which is, fine by me. I'm not running a popularity contest, but, or a re-election campaign. So but yeah, I haven't seen anything that says, hey, this has been, thoroughly vetted and this is the new set of rules. You shall follow these.
Yeah. So how long does a relearning curve like this take?
I would say years. Like I said, I think, I've been involved in federal procurement since 96. I don't think it's like turning on a light switch or like ordering a pizza and it happens in 30 minutes. I think it's going to take some time.
So ultimately, this becomes another matter of CS discretion, where the rules say one thing, but execution varies widely.
I think because they're getting rid of supposedly they're going to be getting rid of so many rules and regulation. That means you're going to have something in its place, and that's going to be discretion and interpretation. And if that's the case, if you got 10,000 people running around doing, federal procurement for the government, you may have 10,000 interpretations and opinions on things. If there's now a lack of something that's written down that says you shall do the following. And even then, I can't tell you how many times where, the FAR says you shall, and again, when I was a civil servant reviewing other folks' work, and I'm like, well, they did the exact opposite. How did you come to the conclusion you shall not do the following?
Yeah.
Or vice versa. And you heard some very long discussions from folks, narratives about how this is how they've always done things, and this is how you have to do it. And I've heard agencies do the same thing. I worked for an agency and an office now it no longer exists. During the change of administrations, the federal government has stepped in and got rid of the entire office, all 125 folks, give or take maybe one or two. And that office literally did the exact opposite of what the FAR mandated and did that on a routine basis.
Wow.
So I don't think overall you're going to see a lot of changes in the sense that if an agency wants to do something a certain way, they're going to do it no matter what.
So does the verdict here? Will the RFO actually reduce time to award and save taxpayer dollars, or are we just rearranging the furniture?
I would say it should, but in the short term, I don't think you're going to see any real changes. Maybe 5 years from now, when folks have the ability to digest these changes, master those changes, implement those changes, and the remaining contractors that do business with the federal government fully embrace those changes, then I would hope, because I'm always optimistic, that this will make things better.
You are always optimistic. I'm wondering about that statement. I think maybe a fairy put that in your head. So last but not least,
Yeah.
what should government contractors be mindful and watchful for during this time frame?
I would say this, and there's a little bit of context in this statement. In the last 15 years, half of all small businesses have left the federal marketplace. Based upon what I've heard, and I'm not trying to pick on the Department of Veterans Affairs, but what I heard from the VA, my clear takeaway is there is not going to be a great emphasis on trying to make awards to contractors who never received a federal contract before.
Okay.
So if that is the case, if you want to be a contractor, even though there's half of the competitors, it's going to be more competitive and difficult to get a contract, because the VA, in my mind, has signaled if you want to get involved in federal procurement, your best bet is to become a sub to someone else.
Yeah, you're stuck. You gotta. Yeah, we already have enough of people we have to deal with, and we're going to make sure we create these big contracts where there's like 9 people or 10 people we deal with, and then if you want to get involved, you have to deal with.
Yeah.
You have to deal with them to get to us.
So correct. So if that is the case, and that is a huge departure, because all I heard from the VA was, they're breaking down barriers. They're doing everything in their power to help you, meaning your company, get a federal government contract. And now the reality and the truth of the matter is none of that's really been effective. Half of the competitors have left. And now they're simply saying, hey, if you want to get involved, maybe your best bet's to be a sub. So if that is the case, I would say there's even more competition, because now you have all these contractors who are trying to claw their way to being part of a contractor team who already has a government contract.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, this is interesting. Well, Mark, this has been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
Folks have to get prepared for this. You're an expert. You can help them just like you help our customers and our clients get through this as they get into business with the VA. Because as you know, we support organizations getting into business with the VA. I really appreciate your time and your thought. I hope you keep studying this. So we'll have another session on this in the next few months to check up on what's transpiring.
My pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. See you.